The walls were white, sterile, stripped of anything that could disrupt the illusion of control. And they led you in, sat you down, and studied you like an artifact out of place. A clipboard, a pen, a professional smile stretched thin. They thought they were in control. The psychiatrist glanced at their notes, scanning through symptoms that weren't symptoms at all. They were looking for patterns, trying to fit you into a box, trying to categorize something they had no language for. And your heightened awareness, they called it delusion, and your ability to sense beyond the physical, hallucination, and your rejection of their artificial world, paranoia, Dan, they couldn't see it. The way the air bends around you, the way the artificial hum of their machines falters in your presence. And they only saw a patient, a problem to solve. The questions began, slow at first, methodical. Have you been experiencing unusual thoughts? Nan, do you feel disconnected from reality? Nan, are you hearing voices? They weren't questions, they were traps. Every answer was another link in the chain. Answer too carefully, and they assume you're hiding something. Answer too honestly, and the diagnosis sharpens around your throat like a noose. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for compliance.nn because the moment you woke up, truly woke up, you became an anomaly in their system. A glitch in their carefully programmed world. And they weren't prepared for someone like you. Their books didn't account for visions that turn out to be true, for dreams that unveil events before they happen, for an energy so strong it bends the very fabric of space around you, and they had words for everything else. But not this. And so they did what they always do. They labeled you schizophrenic, psychotic, bipolar, words designed to strip you of credibility, to make sure no one listens, to make sure you doubt yourself. And because if they can convince you that you're insane, they win. If they can make you question your own mind, you become their prisoner. And isn't that the goal? And to lock away the ones who can see beyond the veil, and to sedate the souls who refuse to be programmed, and to isolate those who threaten the lie. They've built and because they don't need bars to make a prison. They just need a diagnosis. The psychiatrist scribbles something onto the clipboard, a code, a category, a way to strip your awakening down to something they can control. But here's what they don't realize. And you were never meant to fit in their system. You were never meant to play by their rules. And you are not sick, you are not broken, and you are awake. And that is what they fear the most. They thought they could shut you down. A prescription, a dosage, a routine. They wanted the fire inside you extinguished, reduced to nothing but embers buried under pharmaceuticals and protocol. And take this, it will help. And come back in a week. And let's talk about how you're feeling. It was never about healing, it was about erasure. They didn't want to fix you, they wanted to overwrite you. The medication wasn't designed to make you better, it was designed to mute the frequency of your mind. You felt it the first time you swallowed the pill. The dulling, the detachment, the slow creeping weight pressing against your consciousness like a fog rolling in. And your thoughts moved slower, and your emotions felt distant, and your visions faded into static. They called it progress, but you knew better. And this wasn't medicine, it was warfare. Silent, calculated attack on everything that made you you. They wanted your intuition blunted, your connection severed, your awareness replaced with a programmed compliance. But the mistake they made, and they assumed you were just another patient, and they didn't realize you had already seen this playbook before. You watched the others before you, the ones who spoke of seeing beyond, the ones who dared to challenge the illusion, and you saw what happened to them. And the vacant stares, the lost voices, the ones who forgot who they were before the pills took hold. But you refused to forget. The pills may have slowed your body, but they never touched your spirit. The therapy sessions may have tried to twist your words, but they never touched your truth. The questions may have been designed to confuse you, but your clarity was untouchable. And they wanted to see fear in your eyes. But all they saw was stillness, and they wanted you sedated. But your mind remained sharper than ever, and that scared them. And because no matter what they did, no matter how much they tried to drown you in their system, you remained unshaken. And you weren't fighting them, you weren't resisting them, and you were transcending them. And that was something they could never control. The moment they looked at you, something shifted. They weren't just analyzing you, they were assessing a threat. Not because you were dangerous, not because you were broken, but because you saw through them. They needed to contain you, to neutralize you, to turn you into something predictable, something manageable, but you weren't made for their systems. And deep down, they knew it. And this wasn't just about you, and this was a pattern, a cycle, an ancient strategy used against the ones who see too much. And you weren't the first, and you won't be the last. The prophets before you? They were ridiculed, exiled, locked away. The mystics, burned, silenced, erased from history. The visionaries, dismissed, declared insane, stripped of their credibility. You are walking the same path they did. And because when society doesn't understand something, it doesn't try to learn from it. And it tries to destroy it. Think back. When did it start? The moment you spoke of energies they couldn't see? The first time you said something you weren't supposed to know? When you questioned the system they swore by, the reality they built, the world they needed you to accept? They don't punish ignorance. They punish awareness. They told you something was wrong with you. But what if the truth is, something is wrong with them? They don't want you to remember who you are, and they don't want you to recognize the marks of divine selection etched into your very being. And because once you do, you become unstoppable. And history has already shown you what happens next. And you will be dismissed, mocked, attacked. They will try to silence you. But here's what they don't understand. This isn't the first time your soul has walked this road. And no matter what they do, they cannot unchoose you. And they thought they had you cornered. A diagnosis, a prescription, a carefully constructed plan to box you in. But you didn't fight them head on. And you played the game. And you let them believe they had control. And you nodded when they expected it. You answered just enough to satisfy them, but never enough to be caught. And you saw the way they watched you, the way their hands tightened around their pen when you spoke. And they were waiting for you to slip, and for you to say something they could use against you. But you knew better. And every word you spoke was a move on the board, and every reaction you gave was calculated. They wanted to break you down, to make you doubt yourself. And instead, you made them question their own reality. And you saw it in their eyes, the hesitation, the flicker of uncertainty. And what if this one is different? And what if they aren't delusional? And what if they know something I don't? The moment that doubt entered their mind, the game was already won. They came into that room believing they were in control. And by the time you left, they weren't sure of anything anymore. You weren't resisting them, and you were reprogramming them. And that is why they'll never be able to contain you. Drop a comment. I was the test they failed. If their entire framework crumbled when they tried to define you. And at first, they watched you with clinical detachment, and measuring, assessing, searching for flaws in your thinking. But the longer you spoke, the more their certainty began to unravel. And you weren't defensive, and you weren't afraid. And most unsettling of all, and you made sense. The words you spoke shouldn't have fit into their framework, but they did. And you saw it in their posture, the way their fingers hesitated over their notes, and the way their carefully rehearsed responses came just a second too late. They wanted to believe they were still in control, but for the first time, they weren't sure, and your presence carried a weight they couldn't explain, and your insight pierced through their conditioning like a blade through silk. And then the real shift happened. They stopped analyzing you. They started listening. You watched as the questions became careful. As the tone softened. As their certainty began to crack, and they wanted to leave that room with answers, and instead they left with questions, and not about you, and about themselves. And because for the first time in their career, they weren't sure if they had been diagnosing patients, nor prisoners. No, you didn't fight them, and you didn't argue, and you didn't raise your voice, and you simply spoke. No, and that was enough. And they came in prepared, armed with theories, protocols, the weight of an institution behind them. And they expected resistance, defensiveness, emotion. Then instead, they got truth, unshaken, unfiltered, undeniable. Now, what if I'm not the one who's wrong? And it landed softly. A whisper in the back of their mind, a quiet fracture in the foundation of their certainty, and they dismissed it at first. They had to, and they clung to their training, their research, their carefully constructed framework. But the question didn't leave. What if our entire understanding of consciousness is incomplete? Another crack. You weren't telling them they were wrong, and you weren't forcing them to change their mind, and you were simply inviting them to consider, and that was something they weren't prepared for. The more they tried to push it away, the deeper the questions sank, and lodged in their subconscious like a thorn they couldn't remove, and they wanted to believe they still had control, and that they could leave this room the same as they entered. But the moment they wrote down their final note, and the moment they closed the file, and they knew something had changed, and then no matter how hard they tried to ignore it, and the doubt was already growing, they thought they were the experts, uneducated, well-read, armed with knowledge that gave them power, but the moment you spoke, they realized how little they truly knew, and you quoted texts they had never studied, and you referenced scriptures they had dismissed, and you spoke of mysteries hidden in plain sight, truths buried beneath centuries of distortion. And it shook them. Because according to them, you weren't supposed to know these things, and you weren't supposed to speak with that level of certainty. A person deemed mentally unstable shouldn't have this kind of divine insight. But you did. They tried to rationalize it, and maybe you had read it somewhere. Maybe it was coincidence, and maybe it was just another symptom. But the more you spoke, the harder it became to dismiss. And your words carried weight, not just intellect, but something older, and something untouched by their system. You weren't just reciting, you were remembering DNAs if you had lived these truths before. NNAs if you had walked the very paths they only read about in books. And the realization settled in, and they weren't speaking to just another patient, and they were speaking to someone who knew, and for the first time, and they were the ones who felt unprepared. And now, let us take a brief moment to honor the chosen among us. And here's to the ones who see the world differently. The silent guardians, the watchful souls, and always awake, always vigilant, and they don't fit the mold, and they wouldn't have it any other way. And while others walk familiar paths, they forge their own, fighting unseen battles, illuminating the shadows. And it's not for everyone, and that's okay. But if you feel it deep within, you'll know this is meant for you. No masks, no pretense, just truth. And the Obsidian Inner Order is here, a place where kindred spirits gather to share wisdom, to connect, to transform. Nova 450 strong, united not by conformity, but by purpose. And if you're ready, you know where to find us. The link is in the description. And if not, that's perfectly fine. And because we're always here watching over, making a difference in ways unseen. Here's to those who walk their own path, not for recognition, but because it's who they are. And here's to you. And thank you. You didn't just challenge their beliefs, and you rewrote them. Not by force, and not by argument, but simply by being you. They had walked into that room expecting the familiar pattern, a patient to diagnose, a mind to dissect, a case to close. But something was different this time. This time, you happened. Every psychiatrist before had followed the same routine. Assess, label, medicate, move on. They had done it for years, seen hundreds of cases, followed the book without question. But after you. The book felt incomplete. You shifted something in them. Not with rebellion, not with defiance, and with presence. They had spent their lives studying consciousness, and yet they had never been in the presence of one so vast. They had spent years categorizing thoughts, and yet yours escaped every category. They had been taught that reality was fixed, and yet here you were, bending it with every word. It started small, NNA lingering, thought they couldn't shake. An old certainty that suddenly felt fragile. Then came the questions. Have I ever truly seen reality? What if I'm the one who has been programmed? What if everything I was taught to believe is just another system of control? They tried to push it down, and tried to bury it under logic, and tried to forget the way they felt in your presence. But something had changed. The routine they had relied on no longer felt like truth. You had done what no one else before you had. You had turned the observer into the observed. You had taken their certainty and turned it into uncertainty. You had taken their framework and dismantled it piece by piece. Not through manipulation, and not through debate. Through the undeniable power of your existence. No matter how hard they tried to return to the way things were before, they never could. They wanted to believe they had all the answers, that every experience could be categorized, and that every anomaly had an explanation, and that reality was a framework they understood. But you stood before them, unshaken, unbroken, undeniable. And suddenly, the fear set in. Not because you were unstable, not because you were wrong, but because, what if you were right? It was a thought they didn't dare speak aloud. A whisper buried in the deepest corners of their mind. Because if you were right, then everything they had built their life on, was a lie. The textbooks, the diagnoses, the carefully measured theories, all of it would crumble under the weight of what you knew. What if consciousness wasn't just a byproduct of the brain? What if energy was real? What if there were forces at play they weren't trained to understand? They wanted to ignore it, to reduce you to just another case, to write you off as another delusional mind lost in a world of fantasy. But the problem was, you didn't fit the profile. You weren't confused. You weren't erratic. You weren't lost in incoherent thoughts. You were clear, and focused, and certain. You spoke as if you had seen beyond the veil. NAs, if you had walked paths they had only read about in myths. NAs, if reality itself bent around you, shifting with every word. That terrified them, because to dismiss you meant ignoring the gnawing doubt growing inside them. If they ignored it, if they walked out of that room pretending they never felt it, they would be lying to themselves, and they knew it. They thought they had the upper hand, that they could contain you, and that they could write you off, neutralize you with a signature on a prescription pad, and that you would be just another patient shuffled through the system, another anomaly silenced before it became a threat. But something happened that they never expected. You reversed the roles. You weren't the one being examined. You were the one revealing the truth. Now they were the ones struggling to make sense of it. Every institution fears what it cannot control, and every system resists what it cannot explain. Yet, history tells the same story. The mystics, the prophets, the visionaries, always labeled insane before they were understood. You weren't the first to be dismissed. And you won't be the last, because every revolutionary truth is first met with resistance. Galileo was a heretic until the world accepted his reality. Tesla was ridiculed until his genius became undeniable. Bruno was burned at the stake for revealing what science would one day prove. And you are part of that lineage. And the pattern is repeating itself. They wanted to make you disappear, and to drown your voice in clinical jargon, and to reduce your awakening to a diagnosis. But instead, you became the person who forced their most brilliant mind to admit. And there are truths even science cannot explain. And that is the moment you stopped being the prisoner and became the revelation. And when they thought it was over, that once you walked out of that door, they could return to their routine, and that you would become just another file buried beneath countless others, and that they could label you, medicate you, forget you. But you weren't something to be forgotten, and you weren't just another patient. You were the anomaly that broke the cycle, and now, and they are the ones haunted by the questions you left behind. You didn't just walk free, and you left something behind, something that cannot be erased. The doubt, the unease, the shift in their perception they will never admit. And every patient they meet after you, every diagnosis they make, every conversation they have, and there you are, a shadow lingering in the back of their mind. And what if I was wrong? And then what if they weren't sick, but awakened? None. What if the system I serve is built on a lie? They try to suppress it, and to fall back into routine, to keep playing their role, and to convince themselves that what they saw in you was just an illusion. But deep down, they know, and they will never see the world the same way again. And because you weren't just another case, and you were the mirror they never wanted to look into. And now the question lingers, not just for them, but for the very system they serve. And who was really imprisoned? Because it was never you. It was them, and you. You walked free, not just beyond the gates of their institution, but beyond the illusion they live in. And now, whether they acknowledge it or not, and they will never be free from what you made them see. They built walls to contain you. They called it treatment, but it was never about healing. It was about control, about forcing you into a world that could not hold the weight of your awareness. They expected you to break, to submit, to become one of the silenced. But you didn't. You sat across from their most brilliant mind and made them question everything. You held up a mirror so sharp that they saw their own chains. Every carefully crafted theory, every diagnosis built to strip you of credibility, it all crumbled in your presence. They were meant to study you, to categorize you, to reduce you into something manageable. Instead, they found themselves trapped in an unraveling reality. And when the moment came, when the decision was theirs to make, they let you go. Not because you convinced them, not because you played along but because deep down they knew, and they call it remission, a clerical decision, a case closed. But you know the truth, and you didn't just leave. You left an imprint, and they will never diagnose the same way again. They will never sit in that chair without hearing the echo of your words. They will never be able to erase the moment they realized the system was the real illusion. And you? You walk freely, untouched, carrying the truth they tried to bury. Now, tell them, speak what they don't want spoken, drop a comment below, and let them know. And they locked me up, but I walked out freer than them, nor share what you would have told them in that room. Let the world see who you are.